thing we have to fear is
in war,
fear itself.
there is no substitute for victory.
Let us never negotiate out of fear.
We stand undivided, forever united, fighting hand in hand for the liberty we've earned, for glory and honor, for our sons and daughters, ever mindful of the lessons we've learned. Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome to the intersection of faith and politics. This is WallBuilders Live with David Barton and Rick Green. Thank you for joining us today. Visit us at our websites, wallbuilders.com and also wallbuilderslive.com. There at WallBuilders Live, you can get a listing of all of our stations across the country, and you can also get the archives of our radio programs for the last few months, all available right there at wallbuilderslive.com. And you can email us if you'd like to get us to cover one of your questions. Just send it into radio@wallbuilders.com. All right, David, so we cover a lot of different topics here on WallBuilders Live. On Thursdays, we talk about the foundations of the country and the Constitution and the Declaration. So we're going to bleed a little bit into that today because our guest is going to be talking about the Justice Department. But just to set that up, give us a little background on that. What is the Justice Department? Is that, one of those added jurisdictions of government or expansions of federal government, or was that one of the areas the founders actually envisioned and actually fits the original intent of the Constitution?
It's a great question because when you ask what they envision, you look at how they implement it. And so if you go back to George Washington, who was the president of the convention that designed and drafted and wrote the Constitution of the United States, and then he's the first president elected under that Constitution to help put it into play. He knows what they were trying to do. He was the president of the convention. He guided the debates through there. He chaired it, made all the way to the end with that thing. And now he's put in place to implement it. And he is a very faithful, very diligent man. He doesn't carry his own agenda. He serves well. And so he is going to try to make sure he puts in place what they originally intended out of the Constitutional Convention. So he knows Article 2 very well, which is the article that governs him. That is the part of the Constitution that talks about the duties of the president. And there's enumerated powers in the Constitution. We've talked about the fact there are a total of 15 powers that the Constitution gives to the federal government. Some are given in Article 1 to the Congress, some in Article 2 to the president. And so he knows what he's supposed to do constitutionally. And to help him do that, he created 4 cabinet-level departments. Those 4 cabinet-level departments help him to do his proper job. And all the things that have been assigned to him, he's going to do. And so here's those cabinet-level departments. You had Secretary of State. Now, Secretary of State deals with all the foreign relations, foreign affairs. The Constitution says they have the right to establish all these diplomatic things and ambassadors, etc. So Secretary of State was Thomas Jefferson. Then also they have the power to coin money. They have the power to regulate currencies, etc. So you have Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton. Then they also have the military. The Constitution says that the president's commander-in-chief of the military, that Congress can set the rules for the operation of the military, and the president executes that. So to help him do that, he has a Secretary of War, Henry Knox, who was one of his generals in the Revolution. And so those are 3. And then finally, he has been told in the Constitution that one of his primary duties is to make sure that the laws be faithfully executed. So to make sure the laws are executed as passed by Congress and as made federal law, he has Attorney General Edmund Randolph to help him carry out those duties. And that's the Justice Department. So those are the 4 departments that Washington said, I need these 4 departments to be able to carry out what the Constitution has told me the president is supposed to do. And so, yes, the Justice Department is one of those original departments. It has been there since 1789. It was established by George Washington to make sure that the laws of the land were faithfully executed, which was the duty of the President of the United States.
So it's a proper department. It has a proper function and, legitimate.
Now, wait a minute. It's a proper department. I'm not going to say it has a proper function, at least when we look at it today. But it is a proper department. I think the function of it has changed dramatically.
Ah, there you go. You're leading into my next question to
Okay.
you. I was going to ask you if today we're actually functioning in the proper way, and if it's being done the way that the founders intended it.
Well, let's take Attorney General Eric Holder. We have him saying to all the state attorney generals across the United States, ignore your constitutions on marriage. Just ignore them. Don't execute the law of your land. Don't execute the law of your state. I was just in California last weekend, and a judge in California actually upheld Proposition 8 in California as being legitimate. But what's happened is the Attorney General of California has ignored the judge, and he's issuing licenses and telling people to give licenses, etc. That's a complete violation of what the people voted for. Even the liberal California judges said no, the constitutional amendment was done in the right way. It does comply with California's requirements and Constitution. It is a legitimate part of the Constitution. And now you get the Attorney General of California saying, well, ignore it. We don't care what they want. Why do that? Because the Attorney General of the United States is telling you ignore the laws that you disagree with. We have Ted Cruz for the fourth time now who has come out, Senator Ted Cruz has come out with his list showing now 74 deliberate laws that the Justice Department, the Obama administration has said they refuse to enforce because they don't like them. They disagree with them. They want something different. If they had been God, they would have passed something different. And because they're not God, they're just going to ignore what everybody else said. 74 laws. Now, Washington put the Justice Department in place to make sure the laws be faithfully executed. That's not what's happening. And so the Justice Department now has become a political branch, and it is enforcing what it wants to enforce. And by the way, it's a scary thing for the Justice Department because you have career attorneys there who don't get paid on performance. They get paid on time they've served. Whatever they do, they're going to get paid. And so if you want to sue the Justice Department, be prepared to spend 20 years. And how much as a private citizen are you going to have to pay an attorney's fees? Or, by the way, if the Justice Department comes after you and you have to defend yourself, they could make that case go for 20 years. How much are you going to have to pay your private attorneys? So it now, in ways, can be used as an inquisition bureau. Simply economically, you can't keep up with the resources of the Justice Department if they decide to come after you. So when they decide to come after businesses for environmental issues, when they decide to come after businesses for what they consider to be quota or racial issues or affirmative action issues, man, the best thing you can do is just capitulate, sign the agreement, get up and go home, because it's going to be millions of dollars out of your pocket before you get anything decided. That's not the way the Justice Department is supposed to act. It's not supposed to be implementing its own social agenda. It's there to faithfully execute the laws of the land.
Well, unfortunately, I don't think we've got a Justice Department that's doing it the right way. So if you've got one that's not doing it the right way, what do you do? I mean, is it the, sunlight's the best disinfectant? We've got to expose what they're doing. Is that the only way to try to get a change?
Well, there's several things you can do. Is you can sue the Justice Department, take them to court, and that has happened with other agencies. The state of Texas has sued several agencies and wins in court. But the state of Texas has got some resources to put in that. It's not a private citizen. So you can do that. The state of Texas keeps whipping the EPA. That doesn't keep them from keeping going back. As they point out, we've got unlimited resources. We just print more money at the Treasury. It's tax money, but who cares? It's not our money. So you can do it through courts, and often that works. But Congress can also do it by simply defunding areas in the Justice Department. They can cut the budget. Congress on a number of occasions has passed laws that said, this federal judge just gave a ruling. We're not going to appropriate any money to enforce that ruling. So nobody in the Justice Department is allowed, because we think that's an unconstitutional ruling. And that happened when the federal court struck down the national motto, "In God We Trust." It happened when the federal court originally struck down "Under God and the Pledge of Allegiance." The Congress said, that's nuts. We know better than that, and we're not going to fund any part of the Justice Department trying to prosecute somebody who uses "Under God and the Pledge of Allegiance." So you can do it through funding. The House and the Senate can also cut the agencies. There are so many agencies and so many career folks in Justice Department. They can trim that down to where it's supposed to be doing what it's supposed to do, rather than all the extraneous things. There's a lot of ways of doing it, and the president can knock it down. But the problem is the president doesn't want to knock it down. The problem is the Senate will not go along with the House in trying to limit this, because they've always preferred activism from elitism. They prefer judges making policy, bureaucrats making policy, etc. We saw recently in the VA stuff that was happening, all the scandal there, we were able to quickly identify who the perpetrators were of all the stuff in that scandal. But the problem is they're civil service, which means union, so you can't fire them. So the House passed a law that says we want to hold these people accountable. And these people that are killing up to 1,000 veterans through their mismanagement, we want them accountable. So by a margin of 390 to 30, the House passed a measure to make those people in the Justice Department accountable. But the Senate refused to pick it up. They wanted to protect those bureaucrats. They didn't want them to be accountable for what they did to veterans. So you've got that mentality in the Senate. So right now, there's just not much you can do. If the people don't like this, they just elect somebody different. But until they do that, the people in office do have the right, now I'm not going to say the right, they do have the power to do what they're doing. It's wrong what they're doing. But it's up to the people, the voters. The voters are ultimately the ones who fix this, and sunlight is the best disinfectant. If you can bring it out to the voters and show what's happening, and the media certainly is not talking about what's going on in the Justice Department, if you can bring it out to voters and they get ticked off over it, they will make a change.
Well, new book's out to expose exactly, really just how bad it's been. It's by John Fund and by Hans von Spakovsky. It's called Obama's Enforcer, Eric Holder's Justice Department, and John Fund from National Review Magazine will be with us when we come back from the break to talk about the new book. Stay with us here on WallBuilders Live.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. Shortly after the American Revolution, America had become the envy of the world. It still remains a wonder of the modern world as 219 years later, America has become the longest ongoing constitutional republic in the history of the world. What was the foundation upon which our founding fathers established this great nation? According to John Adams, the foundation was Christianity. John Adams declared, "The general principles on which the fathers achieved independence were the general principles of Christianity. Now I will avow that I then believed, and now believe, that those general principles of Christianity are as eternal and immutable as the existence and attributes of God." According to founding father John Adams, it was the principles of Christianity which formed the foundation for American government.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome back to the intersection of faith and politics. WallBuilders Live with David Barton and Rick Green. Thanks for staying with us. Our guest today is John Fund, national affairs columnist for National Review Magazine. How you doing, John? Thanks for coming on, sir.
Thank you. A pleasure.
Hey, good to have you back and excited about your new book, Obama's Enforcer, Eric Holder's Justice Department. What caused you and Hans to take off on this book?
Well, an increasingly obvious representation that Eric Holder has politicized the Department of Justice more than any attorney general has since John Mitchell served Richard Nixon. The Justice Department is supposed to be run by an attorney general who follows two courses of action. One, he's supposed to establish the priorities of the president, and obviously those vary from administration to administration. But he's also supposed to uphold the rule of law to make sure that everyone is treated equally, that there's no fear or favor in the administration of justice, and that people's political enemies aren't punished while their supporters are let off scot-free. And in every instance that we've examined, Eric Holder has been a very partisan, very polarizing attorney general.
He really, the record itself really flies in the face of the whole idea of equal justice and blind justice, right? I mean, these guys it's more of a political department than it is enforcement of the law.
Increasingly, whether it's civil rights or antitrust or, business law, whatever it is, the Attorney General has tilted in the direction of politics, in the direction of what the White House would want, and away from the rule of law. And it's not just conservatives who are saying this. The Supreme Court has said 13 times in the last 2 years, 9-0, with both Obama appointees joining in, that the Obama administration has strayed beyond its constitutional limits and has tried to aggregate onto itself executive power it doesn't have.
Wow, I'm surprised I'm finding myself agreeing with the Supreme Court, but 13 times, 9-0? The
latest ones were on cell phone privacy and recess appointments.
So maybe there is, John, maybe there's hope. Maybe there is a sense of there are actually lines not to cross. There are still jurisdictional limits to the federal government, and in this case, the power of the president, if even the court has said 13 times no and slapped his hand. How does he respond to that when they say, you're outside your bounds.
He continues doing what he's doing, and I guess he hopes that, someday he'll win in the Supreme Court, but he hasn't had a good record so far. People always ask me about the book, well, what can be done about Eric Holder? Look, impeachment is not an issue. The Senate would never go along with it. It would suck all the oxygen out of the room. I think we need more practical methods. One of them is the lawsuit that John Boehner is proposing, which I think would start a national conversation about whether or not Congress should have more ability to go into court and challenge the administration's constitutional theories and overreach. Another one would be the courts are going to be ruling very soon on Eric Holder's outrageous cover-up of the Fast and Furious gun running scandal. That's where guns were bought as by straw buyers in Arizona and Texas, taken to Mexico, fell into the hands of the drug cartel that led to the death of a U.S. border agent and hundreds of Mexican civilians. And Holder has refused to turn over those documents. The House of Representatives held him in contempt, but Holder has ignored that contempt citation. But I think a judge is going to rule very soon on whether or not those documents that Holder refused to turn over are going to have to be given to Congress. So we'll know more about that scandal soon enough.
John Fund, our guest. The book is Obama's Enforcer, Eric Holder's Justice Department. Stay with us. Back in a moment on WallBuilders Live.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. At the time of the American Revolution, numerous other nations also had revolutions, yet 200 years later, America is the only of those nations still under its original form of government. Is this just good luck? Not according to founding father Benjamin Rush. He declared, "I do not believe that the Constitution was the offspring of inspiration, but I am as perfectly satisfied that it is as much the work of a divine providence as any of the miracles recorded in the Old and New Testament." George Washington agreed. In fact, he declared, "I should be pained to believe that the United States have forgotten that divine interposition which was so often manifested during our Revolution, or that they fail to consider the omnipotence of that God who is alone able to protect them. Our founders acknowledged that our national success had come from God."
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
We're back on WallBuilders Live. Our guest today is John Fund. He used to be the editorial board member and columnist for Wall Street Journal. Now he's the national affairs columnist for National Review magazine and the co-author of a new book out called Obama's Enforcer, Eric Holder's Justice Department. I'm so glad that you guys did the book, because it does seem like we get so jaded that we start thinking that, these guys are never going to be held to account. They're never going to be held responsible for what they're doing. They just play the stonewalling game, which is what they're doing. But bringing light to it through books like this and through the media, is that our best shot at finally getting them held accountable?
Well, it's the beginning. And remember, I have no doubt that much of what Eric Holder has done and much of what President Obama has supported him in doing is going to be found to be illegitimate. The question is whether or not they can run out the clock until January 20th, 2017. One of the reasons Holder hasn't left office is if he were to resign as Attorney General, I doubt that Obama would be able to get another Attorney General confirmed very easily. And I also doubt that Eric Holder would really have much of an easy going in private life. I think his new occupation would be permanent witness.
Yeah, he's going to be a little busy with that pretty soon. So,
I mean, if he were in private life, he'd actually have to answer the subpoenas rather than ignore them.
Yeah, no doubt. So what would you like to see accomplished with the book in terms of America's education about what the proper role of the Justice Department is and how that's been abused?
Well, the Justice Department impacts all of our lives. It employs 120,000 people. It has 40 divisions reaching into every crevice of American life. It's an extremely powerful, often unaccountable institution. The more that we understand it, the more that we can understand how we need to reform it. A perfect example is the IRS. The IRS investigation of those nonprofit groups that were singled out for special penalty has been going on for 13 months. There's no evidence that it's a serious investigation. In fact, there's a lot of evidence that it's not being taken seriously. The IRS didn't impound any of the IRS, the Justice did not impound any of the IRS computers, and that might have perhaps led us to learn more about Lois Lerner's lost emails. Many witnesses have not even been asked any questions by the Justice Department. So, and of course, the head of the Justice Department investigation is a former top donor to Barack Obama's presidential campaigns. So clearly there, justice is being denied. Richard Nixon was impeached in 1974 in part because of his misuse of the IRS. The IRS never did anything. They just were asked by Nixon if they would turn over audit material to the White House. In this case, the IRS was actually misused, and the response of the Democrats in Congress has been, we're standing with Holder. We don't want to know the truth.
Wow. Yeah, just turn a blind eye. Wasn't it, when Nixon finally had to give it up, wasn't it because Republicans like Baker said, you got to go. It's time to change this. Are there any Democrats that are willing to do that to guys like Holder and Obama?
Well, 17 Democrats did support in the House of Representatives the move to hold Holder in contempt. 17 doesn't sound like a lot, but it's one out of 8 Democrats in the House of Representatives. And several law professors, including Jonathan Turley of George Washington University and Lawrence Tribe of Harvard, have started to question the Obama administration's executive power overreach, saying, this is not what previous presidents thought were their legitimate powers. And it's clearly the kind of overreach that liberals properly chastised and criticized Richard Nixon for exercising.
It's sometimes is overwhelming. I got to admit, when I see some of the things coming out of this administration, I begin to wonder if we're ever going to be able to hold them account. But you've really helped to at least show us how to do it and show how bad what it is that what they've done, just how bad it is. What's the best place for folks to get the book? Where do you recommend?
Obama's Enforcer, Eric Holder's Justice Department, is doing very well. It's been on Drudge and Rush and Sean Hannity's show and Megyn Kelly's show, and it's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, on the web, and good bookstores everywhere.
John Fund, author of Obama's Enforcer, Eric Holder's Justice Department, along with Hans von, let's see if I say this right, John. Do I get 2 chances at this or only once? I've had Hans on a few times, and every time I get it wrong. Spakowski, is that right?
You got it exactly right.
Oh, if I'd only had him here to hear it. You tell him I got it right, okay?
You got it.
All right, John, appreciate you coming on, man.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Back in a moment with David Barton. Have you ever wanted to learn more about the United States Constitution but just felt like, man, the classes are boring, or it's just that old language from 200 years ago, or I don't know where to start? People want to know, but it gets frustrating because you don't know where to look for truth about the Constitution either. Well, we've got a special program for you available now called Constitution Alive with David Barton and Rick Green, and it's actually a teaching done on the Constitution at Independence Hall in the very room where the Constitution was framed. We take you both to Philadelphia, the cradle of liberty in Independence Hall, and to the WallBuilders Library, where David Barton brings the history to life to teach the original intent of our founding fathers. We call it the Quick Start Guide to the Constitution because in just a few hours through these videos, you will learn the Citizen's Guide to America's Constitution. You'll learn what you need to do to help save our constitutional republic. It's fun, it's entertaining, and it's going to inspire you to do your part to preserve freedom for future generations. It's called Constitution Alive with David Barton and Rick Green. You can find out more information on our website now at WallBuilders.com.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us here on WallBuilders Live. Thanks to John Fund for coming on to talk about the new book. You can check it out bookstores everywhere. Obama's Enforcer, Eric Holder's Justice Department. And, David, obviously, from what John was saying and what you mentioned at the beginning of the program, this is definitely a department that's outside the bounds of what the founders intended.
Well, it is, and I think it's amazing that John points out that 13 times in 9-0 decisions, the Supreme Court has smacked down Holder. Now, that doesn't stop him from doing what he's doing. It's people who buy lottery tickets. They lose 99.99% of the time, but they keep doing it. They hope one time they'll get a winner. And so the Supreme Court, including Obama's appointees, are smacking him down. And it's, I thought it was a really significant point that John made that once Holder gets out of office, he may spend his full time in court because he has had so many subpoenas issued to him and he just ignores them. He's had so many subpoenas issued to his department to see documents, see records, to see information that Congress is supposed to be exercising oversight over. He refuses to give it to Congress. He refuses to answer subpoenas. I don't know of anybody else in the country that would not be prosecuted for ignoring a subpoena. I mean, you can't do that. Well, he's above the law because he is the enforcer of the law, and if he refuses to execute it, what are you going to do? So I think that was a great point that John made, that once he gets out of office and doesn't have that protection anymore, there are so many lawsuits lined up against him that he may be answering for. He may be a full-time person in court. He may need to set up a tent in the back of a courtroom somewhere because he may not leave it for years. So that's, and I don't think people have heard that much lawlessness about Holder before, but that's the way it has been going. It's just too bad that there's so much lawlessness associated with that, and that's unfortunate. But I do agree with him that impeachment's not an issue. You're not going to get the Senate to go along with this. Harry Reid thinks Holder's doing a great job and is not going to try to do anything to do that. So this should never have been a politicized department. The rule of law should never be politicized, and that's what's happened. So we've got to see if this next election doesn't help send a message, and we can do something in November if we want to. We can change the Senate, which really puts Holder in a hard position if we get a different Senate in November.
Well, hopefully just hearing how bad it is enough to wake people up and grab their friends and family and make sure that everybody goes to vote and work for change to get rid of this corruption. Thanks for listening today to WallBuilders Live.
We stand undivided.